Ladies and gentlemen, if I asked you the weird question if you would like to hear Chopin play Bach, you would probably all say hell yes, we would like to hear him play Bach, because we all know that Chopin really liked Bach and that he played Bach a lot. Not only did he play the two books of the Well-Tempered Clavier from memory, but he also used that in his lessons extensively. And that must have been also the idea of Ben Laude when he invited Alan Walker, the great scholar known for his Liszt studies and many other things, on his channel, and Alan Walker had to say this about Chopin and Bach.
The influence of J.S. Bach on Chopin's music is deep and profound. It's not generally known. The French Musicological Society published the first volume of Bach's 24 Preludes and Fugues, edited by Chopin. Now, I have it here. Not only do they have Chopin's metronome marks, they have expression marks, diminuendo and crescendo marks, forte, piano, accented notes where voices come in. And it's a clear indication that when Chopin played these works, he was not a musicologist. He was actually a romanticist, whatever he might have been as a composer, and he opened up all the stops when it came to playing these preludes and fugues. It's a revelation.
I can imagine Chopin opening up the first book to the C-sharp major prelude. And if you play the first three notes slowly of that prelude of Bach, it is the Raindrop Prelude.
By the way, the words of Ben at the end might be very prophetic and more true than he actually imagines. We're going to break this down because this fragment is really cool. There is a lot to say. First off, what strikes me a little bit is the fact that Alan Walker contributed these annotations to the hand of Chopin, while they are not. If he had read just the preface by Eigeldinger, then he would know, and maybe he just missed that, that is not a big deal, of course, that these indications were meticulously copied from an edition made by Karl Czerny in 1837. And so that's actually the edition. You will remember I made a video on that. This is this edition. I have the original of that French edition. So here you have the same metronome mark. So the 92 metronome mark that Alan Walker actually contributed to Chopin is not Chopin's, it is Karl Czerny's. Also, all the other indications of dynamics and you know, all the other things are copied by Chopin from this Czerny edition, which is really cool. And that, in fact, opens a whole new chapter to discuss. This is, by the way, the video that I made recently about this edition. I used that edition also in the past to discuss Czerny's tempi for Bach's inventions, because there it is really crazy. We're going to come back on that. But let's not over-dramatize this. It's just like, yeah, whatever. It are not Chopin's metronome marks. There are Czerny's metronome marks. They are not Chopin's interpretations, not his edition. It is just what Chopin took from Czerny. And by the way, I made a point before. It shows what a reputation Karl Czerny had. Today, we almost all hate Czerny for his crazy etudes, but also that we will address in this video. For those of you who are new here, we focus a lot on tempo reconstruction, reading the original metronome marks. And we strongly believe, in fact, we don't believe, we know for sure that these metronome marks are not supposed to be read in our modern way, the single beat reading, so to say, where you have one tick of the metronome connected to the note value in the metronome mark, but just two ticks of the metronome connect to the metronome mark. Anyway, it's very simple. It's a conversion of the tactus up and down. The left, right of the metronome, of the pendulum, so to say, is just the conversion of that movement up and down. And the 1 and 2 and 3 and so on habit that still applies for many physicists to read the pendulum today. They rarely say 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3. We call that the WBMP, the whole beat metronome practice. And before you say like there are absolutely no sources for that, well, we are about to publish a book. Manuscript is almost finished. We will definitely publish it before the year 2027, which is Beethoven's year, in which you will get 600 plus pages about the history of that. And I have to say to you, like the single beat practice, this reading of this 1, 2, 3, 4 is more of an exception historically than it is actually the rule. But that's not the point. The point is, if Chopin stuck to Karl Czerny's tempi, which of course, why wouldn't you? Because Czerny actually says in his preface that many of these tempi go back to Beethoven, then you would say, okay, that is actually cool. Like Walker says, it's a revelation. Okay, then the question is, what are we doing with that revelation? Are we just talking about it, or are we actually actively trying to apply it? Well, here is a video from Jean-Jacques Eigeldinger, that's actually the original editor, the scholar, is great Chopin scholar. You should read his books about Chopin. It's really, all of them are really, really, really interesting. And more than that, some of them are really essential. Chopin is vu par ses élèves, so Chopin seen by his students is actually a must-have. You have to read that. If you buy one book, buy Moscheles' Diaries. That's maybe the best way for you to travel back in time. Moscheles has witnessed so many changes that you have to understand, you have to also put in the context, and that will directly lead you to a different interpretation of metronome marks, if only that. But also Jean-Jacques Eigeldinger, Chopin, as seen by his students, is really gold. The information that's there is just unseen. But so you present this edition, you make a new edition, the one that Alan Walker talks about, and you say, okay, it's a revelation, words of Alan Walker, not of Eigeldinger, but of course it's Chopin's view. Like he was just embracing that of Czerny. And then you demonstrate these pieces, like in this case, a vivace, so the C sharp major, and you play it actually slower than the metronome mark. And then at the very end, something really cool happens. Let's listen.
Et donc nous voyons Chopin recopier les indications.
So that was one part. And now let's listen to the end and especially pay attention to the last two bars. So suddenly we slow down to 52. That is almost the Czerny indication in whole beat. I'm not saying that you cannot do that, but Chopin didn't mark it. And now we can, that's what I say. What do we do with this revelation? Like Chopin marks everything, every little accentuation, every crescendo, everything that you need to do in the score is written, except a huge ritardando at the end, where you go actually in half tempo. Well, that is something that is already something we can discuss about, and that should be like, okay, why would you want to do that? I understand why the player is doing that, because it makes sense. How can you end in a tempo like that? But there is more. If we would use all of this information, all of this context of this edition, and we say, okay, Chopin embraced the metronome marks given by Czerny for Bach, then he embraced the metronome marks by Czerny. And again, why wouldn't he? But there's a consequence to that. If we use that context in order to just shed light of like, okay, did Chopin actually use that metronome mark in single beat, or did he use that metronome mark in whole beat? Well, that's a great question. And from this score only, it's hard to say, because 92, even though the player played a little slower, he starts considerably slower, I guess many professional players could do that. There is another piece, for instance, we can have a look at, like this. This is, as you know, the first invention by Bach, also metronomized by Karl Czerny. 138 for the quarter note. Now, and while the C sharp major prelude of the WTC is a piece generally we hear played in a tempo around 72, even on harpsichord. Like, people tend to play this prelude rather quickly. That's not true for this invention. I have here a recording for you made by the Dutch Bach Society. The cool thing about it is that it is played by a young girl, which in fact matches the description that Karl Czerny gave for these pieces. He said, like, these pieces are for beginners. It's easy music. So this is a perfect match. And so let's listen to how this young player actually handles the music. Of course, in the context of this video, I know of at least a few that will jump into the comments about this is way too slow and a professional can play it much faster. Well, I'm not going to debate that, but I'm not so sure that professionals would want to play this piece much faster. Here's, for instance, the great Gustav Leonhardt. So it's more or less the same tempo. And it makes sense. And we all know the piece like that, so we don't object to the fact that it is placed in this way. Okay, but if we then go to the score again, we see here 138 by Czerny. And you all are tempo junkies, I think. Most of you, you know that this, what we just heard, is not 138 quarter note. It is, in fact, surprise, surprise, exactly half. This little girl plays the Invention number 1 by Bach, as Gustav Leonhardt is doing, in a tempo of quarter note 69. So, if Chopin really intended this piece here, the 92 dotted quarter note, to be in single beat, then he should be fine if we actually sped this up by 2, and he would say, like, obviously, this is the tempo that Czerny had in mind for this music, and it would sound like this. Just a consequence. And now you could say, like, yeah, but this is also possible. Maybe. The question is if you want to play it like that. We just try to find a solution to what Chopin really thought by annotating that score of Bach with the tempi given by Czerny. But there is more. You can also go to Czerny's etudes, and then you arrive to really other problems, problems of another nature, problems of another level even. So for instance, as I recently had in the video, like the Opus 299. Of course, you will hear people say, like, there he is again with the Opus 299. Listen, I could point to hundreds, if not thousands of pieces, but this is just very much in reach for everyone. Everyone can take the Opus 299 by Czerny. These pieces of the first 2 books are almost sight-readable in a moderate tempo. In fact, they are meant by Czerny for beginners. And on top of that, Czerny writes in his preface, you practice these pieces until you can play them in the metronome marks that I gave for them. So there is no excuse. And before you say, like, yeah, but professionals can do it. A, it's not meant for professionals, and B, professionals cannot do it. Because you have to play constantly a rate of 15 to 16 notes per second. If you go to his daily exercises, you go up to 18 notes per second. And there are matches for the virtuoso players where you go up to 23 notes a second. So nobody can do that. It's out of the question. Listen, I'm just connecting that 92 dotted quarter note by Czerny acknowledged by Chopin to some other metronome marks given by Czerny. And so if Chopin would have not be cool with those, I would love to see some quotes. But before we do that, let's listen to the result of Czerny in modern reading, single beat. If you're new here, you're gonna be shocked because that's something that you never hear from anyone except here on this channel. There we go. And if you cannot do this, then we have a fundamental problem. No, these metronome marks are no targets, they are real accurate tempi. The fact alone that so many people still say today, like, metronome marks are just like a range of tempo. It's the Italian tempo words that you should look at. I'm not kidding you. That's something you hear very often. That is actually ridiculous because the metronome was put on the market, was actually demanded by composers like Beethoven and others to have Finally, a tool to give precise, accurate tempo indications to a score because the Italian tempo words were too vague. And so today, because these metronome marks in single beat do not make any sense, people reverse it. They say like the Italian tempo words are actually more important, the metronome marks are just giving a target. No, it's the other way around. And so if you cannot play this etude and all the other Czerny etudes and all the other pieces by Schumann and all the other pieces by Mendelssohn and Chopin and Horry Hertz and Kalkbrenner and you name it, well, then we have a problem, because then the 92 dotted quarter note in the Chopin Czerny score is also not dotted quarter note 92, but half of that. And in fact, if I take another thing here, for instance, the Opus 500 by Czerny, and we read what he had to say about Vivace. That is his pianoforte school, by the way, part 1. He says, Vivace, lively with warmth. Well, that is very vague as a description, right? Well, guess what? Metronome marks replaced all of that. But if we then go to the normal Italian tempo words, we have here grave, largo, larghetto, andante, andantino, allegretto, allegro. And allegro he describes as fast, lively with agility. Allegretto he marks as somewhat lively, cheerful, yet not hurrying onward. I would say fast with warmth is somewhere here in between a somewhat lively and fast, lively with agility. You can have another opinion, but it's definitely not very fast. Otherwise, he would have written it like that. So if we consider Vivace to be just between Allegretto and Allegro, well, that surprises me again. While in the demonstration of that presentation of the edition by Chopin, why the pianist, if we are dealing with a tempo that is only a little faster than Allegretto and slower than Allegro, why not just stick to the metronome marks? Because both Jean-Jacques Eigeldinger and also Alan Walker said, like, we have metronome marks by Chopin/Czerny. Well, if that recording, if that edition, if those annotations are a revelation, not my words, the words of Alan Walker, well, why not apply them? Well, the answer is, of course, obvious, because it doesn't make any sense. People would walk away from a recording made in dotted quarter note 92, even for a piece that we are used to hear a little faster than I would say was practiced in Bach's time. So, final point. The WTC one I recorded a year ago or 2 years ago. It's available. It's actually the blue disc over there. You can buy it if you want. There's the link in the description. And also you can listen to the entire recording on Bandcamp 3 times for free. I think even it's on Spotify, this one. But I recorded that not according to the Czerny metronome marks, but I was a little, if not a lot, influenced by them, because the more I look at it, the more I see the reflection of a tradition that came to Beethoven. And that's really cool. So for this particular prelude, actually, I didn't remember that, but I listened to it in the preparation for this video. I play actually whole beat. Exactly. So that's the result. Prepared to be shocked. And by the way, this is not a beautiful view. Those two instruments like this. And I'm about to record the second part of the WTC, so stay tuned for that. Of course, when you know the piece much faster, then this will be a shock. It's not easy to go from a fast performance to a slower performance. That's also something that really makes our work very, very, very hard. We are selling something, so to say, for which you need time. And the first reaction, especially in the context of a kind of debate, discussion, discourse about what is the correct quote-unquote tempo, is a reaction of running away from it, because that's not possible that it is like that, that it was like that. But you have to realize that what you're hearing now is exactly on the same level, tempo-wise, I would say, with that first invention. There is no difference. Like, if you think this is a normal tempo, then this is a normal tempo as well. And on top of that, I invite you to listen to it. It's also on YouTube here. I see it's published. So there is no excuse for you not to actually listen to it. Listen to it a few times and then try to discover. Set aside all discussions, everything with what we said, every debate, every nonsensical argument against or in favor of Holbeat. Just listen to the result. Listen to the character. The character is joyful. It's actually it's lively, but it's still with warmth. I mean, you could say like, yeah, with Wim, you are completely biased. Well, it's what you hear. And since we now have a recording exactly in whole beat, I can also demonstrate you what it sounds in single beat. And now I'll show you the effect when you go back to slower, how difficult it is. It's similar as to listening. Like I said recently, I listened to my videos on 1.5, 1.75. I listened to a lot of other videos also on higher speed because it's just time saving. But you know that the bad thing is that when you go to a normal speech tempo, that it feels like, there's something missing. The question is now, when really this edition by these annotations by Chopin are really a revelation. And go and watch that clip with Alan Walker and Ben Lode again. Like, see the enthusiasm of these people. It's really cool to see. But my question to them is like, do realize that we are so used today to talk about these things, about the great Beethoven, about these metronome marks, about the tempo, about what the performance of that time that we really want to reconstruct. I truly believe that. Made also a video about the Chopin competition that's coming up in the United States. And I really believe that these people, the jury, the competitors, the participants, I would say, the commenters, that they want an authentic Chopin. But the question is, do we talk about it or do we take the facts seriously? So that's my question, where to go from here. Like if even the pianist who is invited to demonstrate, I cannot repeat that enough, the introduction of that edition with Eigeldinger on a playable piano is actually not a meeting, the 92, the metronome marks that are in Chopin's edition. And even when he's playing slower, actually fails to have all the dynamic shades in that score executed. Do we not have something to think about? So my question is, how many more facts do we need in order for both musicologists or musicians, Alan Walker, Ben Lode, actually to see what's in front of their eyes? What makes them so enthusiastic is actually not what is in front of their eyes, because what is in front of their eyes is a confirmation of something that, if we care about authenticity, that something today is not corresponding to what Chopin, Czerny, Beethoven, all the other composers had in mind. Just follow the logic. A metronome mark copied by Chopin, acknowledged by Chopin, which is really cool. These metronome marks didn't make any sense. Well, Chopin copied one. You heard the result in my sped up recording. So we have a huge confirmation by one of the biggest geniuses lived on this planet, Frédéric Chopin, that these Czerny metronome marks were correct. So then we go, for instance, to the first invention. We double the speed and suddenly it sounds like weird. But then we go to the Opus 299 to just give one example, and suddenly, we come in a territory that is impossible for any one of us. Any living creature today or tomorrow or in 500 years will fail to reproduce that. It's not possible. This is not designed to do that, and this is neither designed to do that. And so when we have this chain of logic, would you then not want to say to the participants of that Chopin competition, like, actually, we should take the metronome marks by Chopin and we should halve them because there is no other explanation? And the cool thing is, then the first etude, the famous C major, is actually reflecting Bach's first prelude of the WTC. Chopin simply took the third and put it on top. And if you then reduce that tempo by 2, you come in the same territory as these Bach tempi. That's a really cool connection. And so the question that also Walker asked at the beginning of this, this video, the clip that I showed you, Chopin was not a musicologist, but he was a musician. The question is like, what is the best guarantee to go back in time and to solve these mysteries of authenticity? I would say you have to combine both. And when you combine both, you actually get this. Musicians that also research the facts. We're not musicologists. We don't have a degree. We don't have a diploma, so to say, but we know when we see facts and how to apply them, and then be like brutally honest with yourself. And then the only path is actually leading to this. Link in the description box. You can buy it. 80 euros. I keep saying it. It's not cheap. It's 4 years of work. We sold over 400 of these. So be part of that. And there is another coming. Alberto is recording the entire Beethoven keyboard works. There will be a series of 30 CDs. So at the end, you'll have 40 CDs in 4 boxes. It's actually collector's items. Anyways, some open questions here, guys. For you, leave me in the comments if I made my point clear. I hope so. Sometimes I doubt a little bit, like the fact if I am clear enough, if I make my points clear enough. For many of you, I know I do, but I wonder, like, why is it so hard to see the logic? Or is it that we actually do not want to go back in time, that we actually do not really care about the authentic Chopin, but that the authenticity for many musicians and scholars today is like keeping what we are, emotionally attached to, which is the modern current performance practice, that we want to stay there. Listen, there is nothing wrong with that. There is absolutely, as a society, we can decide that. I would say it's harder for a musicologist because there we expect facts in front of us. When we don't meet these metronome marks, they should say that. They are in a position that they can say that, but they don't. And so maybe we have still work to do, develop into, a musical society that says, okay, we really care about what Chopin had in mind, and let's now look at the facts and let's reconstruct it. And I can guarantee you, when you do that, it will take a little bit of time. But it's like looking around the corner. That's like such a much richer world. That music, be it from Chopin, be it from Schumann, Beethoven, if you reconstruct the timeline of that composition, because that's what you do if you reconstruct the tempo, then of course you have to learn to deal with that. Timings are different, articulation is different, accentuation is different. But once you manage that, that's unbelievable. Then, can I say it? Today's performances of these pieces, they look like a Charlie Chaplin movie that is just sped up. It's that. Listen, some open questions. Leave me in the comments all of your answers. And also, in the comments, right above there's a description box. You'll find a link not only to this recording, you can listen also to this for free on Bandcamp 3 times. But there is also a link to my Patreon site. Go and check it out. There are major updates coming, but you find right now a lot of practicing sessions, a lot of concerts, a lot of podcasts, and my patrons enable me to record these videos for you. So thank you for checking that out. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.